The first night shift. Have you ever worked a night shift? If so, you know there's something strange about the city when it sleeps. The empty hallways, the absolute silence, the feeling that you're not alone, even when you should be. But some things happen after midnight that should never be seen. Whispered stories among employees. Tales of figures appearing where they shouldn't be. Of doors opening on their own. Of voices coming from nowhere. Of trains stopping at stations that don't exist. Tonight, you're going to hear 3 of these stories. Real accounts, or just the delusions of those who've spent too much time in the darkness. I suggest you decide for yourself. But if you're alone, maybe it's best to wait until sunrise. I was never the kind to scare easily. Working the night shift always had its quirks, but I liked the quiet. It was a simple job. Watching over the convenience store, keeping everything clean, and serving the few customers who showed up in the dead of night. But on that first night, something felt off. It wasn't the silence. I expected it to be quiet. It was something else. An uneasy sensation, like someone was watching me before I even stepped inside. I shrugged it off and went about my routine, trying to ignore the feeling. Few people entered the store that night. A taxi driver bought coffee, a group of teenagers grabbed snacks, and an old man spent nearly 20 minutes picking out a magazine. Nothing unusual. Until around 3 in the morning, the door chime rang. I looked up, expecting another late-night customer, but the man who walked in felt wrong. He was tall and thin, wearing clothes that looked far too old for someone who appeared so young. But what truly unsettled me was that he never looked directly at me. Not at me, not at anything in particular. He simply walked slowly down the store aisles, touching nothing. I tried not to think too much about it, but the next night, the same thing happened. At exactly the same time, 3 in the morning, the same man, the same slow steps, the same vacant stare at the shelves. And once again, he left without buying anything. On the 3rd night, I started paying closer attention. His face seemed empty, as if he had no expression at all. But what truly unsettled me was realizing that, even though the store was empty, he never looked at me. He never acknowledged my presence. He just stood in the same aisle for a few minutes and walked out. I went to the security cameras to review the footage from the previous nights. I needed to make sure I wasn't imagining things. But when I watched the recordings, something was wrong. I could see the store, the shelves, the door opening at the exact time, but there was no one walking in. The door chime rang. The motion sensors detected movement, but the man simply wasn't there. I closed the video and rubbed my eyes. I knew I had seen him. I saw him with my own eyes. So why wasn't he in the footage? Topic 2. The customer who buys nothing. Time passed, and I became more paranoid. I knew he would come that night. I knew he would enter, stand still, and leave without buying anything. But this time, I had to understand what was happening. So, I made a decision. When he arrived, I would confront him. I would ask directly who he was and what he wanted. But what happened that night was far worse than anything I could have imagined. Because when the door chime rang and I looked up, he was already inside. I never saw him enter. He was just there. That was when I noticed something that made my heart race. Something impossible. In the reflection of the store's glass door, I was alone. The man had no reflection. I froze. The air around me suddenly felt colder, and a chill crawled up my spine. This made no sense. He was right there. I could see him standing just a few feet away, and yet his reflection was missing. My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe I was too tired. But every cell in my body screamed that something was wrong. The man tilted his head slightly, as if he was waiting for my reaction. My instinct screamed run, but my legs wouldn't move. Then, the door chime rang again. I blinked, and he was gone. Topic 3. The security camera and the impossible. My chest rose and fell rapidly, as if I had just run a marathon. I rushed to the security cameras. The footage was there. The timestamp showed the exact moment the door chime rang. The motion sensor activated, but once again, there was no one in the footage. My fingers trembled as I rewound the tape again and again, but it was like the space around him had been erased from the recording. I sat behind the counter, clutching my head. I wasn't losing my mind. I knew I had seen that man. So why wasn't he in the images? I tried not to think about it for the rest of my shift. I focused on organizing the shelves, keeping my mind occupied with anything else. But every time I glanced at the door, I expected to see him again. Maybe he never really left. And if he was still there, standing in some corner of the store, just waiting for me to look the wrong way, I felt ridiculous. I tried not to think about it for the rest of my shift. I focused on organizing the shelves, keeping my mind occupied with anything else. But every time I glanced at the door, I expected to see him again. Maybe he never really left. And if he was still there, standing in some corner of the store, just waiting for me to look the wrong way, I felt ridiculous. But at the same time, something inside me screamed not to ignore it. Then I heard it, a soft thud from the back of the store. Something had fallen from one of the shelves. My heart hammered in my chest. I checked the time, 3:15 a.m., the exact time he always appeared. I took a deep breath and walked toward the sound. A bag of chips had fallen to the floor. I knelt to pick it up, and that's when I saw it. A note, a small, folded piece of paper tucked between the snack packages. It wasn't there before. My chest tightened as I reached for it. With shaking hands, I unfolded the paper. 2 words were written in uneven handwriting, as if scribbled in a hurry. Look up. My body locked up. I knew I didn't want to follow that instruction, but at the same time, I couldn't help it. My eyes slowly drifted upward, and what I saw above the shelves made all the air vanish from my lungs. The story was only beginning. My eyes remained fixed on the top of the shelf for too long. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't look away. My heart pounded in my chest, and the air around me felt heavy. What was I expecting to see? A shadow? Glowing eyes in the dark? Nothing. There was nothing there. But the unease remained, like something was there, just outside my field of vision. I swallowed hard and lowered my head. I convinced myself it was just my tired mind playing tricks. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. That night, I couldn't sleep when I got home. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that note in my mind. Look up. What did it mean? Who put it there? What was happening in that store? The next night, I arrived earlier than usual. I needed to check something before my shift started. I went straight to the security cameras. I searched for the recording from the previous night, and there it was. The bag of chips simply fell. But it wasn't an accident. It was pushed. The customer came back at 3 in the morning, as always. But this time, something was different. He didn't just walk through the aisles and leave. He stayed longer. He stopped in front of the counter. And for the first time, he looked directly at me. His eyes were deep, as if there was no light inside them. His skin was paler than before, like it was losing its color. The silence was suffocating. No words, no movement, just him, standing there, staring. I tried to ignore the fear and asked, "Do you need something?" The man blinked slowly. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. It was as if he was trying to speak, but couldn't. Time stretched, and for a moment, I was sure he wasn't breathing. Then, he turned and walked out, completely silent. Even when the door chime rang, he was as if he had no weight at all. The chime rang again. I turned quickly, expecting to see him come back. But no one was there. The absolute silence swallowed me, and the cold I felt that night wasn't from the air conditioning. I knew that, sooner or later, I would have to face this. Running was no longer an option. Whatever was in the store wasn't just trying to scare me. It wanted me to see it, to understand it. My breathing was uneven, but my feet finally moved. I walked slowly toward the aisle where the shadow had appeared before. My footsteps echoed strangely, as if the space around me had stretched. Each shelf felt taller, as if I were stepping into a different version of the store. Then, the light flickered again, and for a split second I saw him. The customer, but he wasn't the same. His face, once just pale and expressionless, was now completely distorted, as if his skin had been stretched beyond its limit. His eyes were too deep in their sockets, and his mouth was wrong. A grotesque, impossible smile. It stretched too wide, exposing tiny, white, perfectly aligned teeth, like a mask that didn't quite fit his face. My body locked up. He didn't move. He just stood there, watching, with that smile. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but my legs were frozen. Then, the light flickered once more, and he was gone, but the smile remained, not in the air, not in a shadow. It was on the glass door of the store, like a reflection left behind. And at that moment, I realized something. It didn't matter whether he was inside or outside. He was already with me. After that night, sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt his presence, standing in the store aisle, watching me. Every shadow in my room seemed to have eyes. Every noise in the night made me hold my breath. On the fourth night without sleep, my body finally gave in. I collapsed onto my bed and passed out instantly. But what happened next didn't feel like a dream. I was in the store, but it wasn't the store. The space was the same, but it was wrong. The shelves were taller. The lights flickered nonstop, and the air was thick, like I was breathing through a dense fog. The clock on the register read 3 a.m., and then the door opened. He walked in, but this time he wasn't alone. There were others, tall, thin shadows, standing motionless. Their faces were blurred, undefined, but I knew they were looking directly at me. They were waiting. The customer, the one I already knew, walked slowly to the counter. His smile was still there, but now it felt real, like it had been carved directly into his skin. He raised his hand and pointed at me. The shadows began to move. I felt an immense pressure on my chest, like all the air was being sucked out of my lungs. My body was being pulled forward. I tried to scream. I woke up, back in my bedroom, but the sensation was still there, and the clock beside my bed read 3 a.m., the exact moment he had entered the store. Inside my dream. Or maybe it was never just a dream. I never went back to sleep after that dream. Or whatever that was. I sat on my bed for hours, staring at the clock, waiting for something to happen, waiting for proof that I was still trapped in that twisted reality. But nothing came. Morning arrived, and my next shift at the store was approaching. I should have called in sick. Maybe I should have just never gone back. But something inside me told me that running wouldn't fix anything. That somehow, it wasn't just inside the store anymore. It was with me. When I arrived for my shift that night, I felt it before I even stepped inside. The weight in the air. The store was darker than usual. The lights flickered, even when the switches were off. I took a deep breath and went behind the counter. That's when I noticed it. The stockroom door was open. I never left that door open. I always locked it before starting my shift. My heart pounded. Something was different. I walked toward it, each step heavy, as if the floor wanted to hold me in place. When I pushed the door open, the darkness inside felt thicker than normal. My hand trembled as I reached for the switch. The light flickered once, twice, then it stabilized. And that's when I saw it. Something on the floor. Another note. But this time it wasn't folded. It was pinned to the wall, with deep scratches around the edges of the paper, like clawed fingers had dug into it. Every part of me screamed not to read it, to walk away, to pretend I never saw it. But it was too late. The words were written in uneven, jagged letters. pressed so hard into the paper it had nearly torn through. "You are already here with US." My stomach churned, and then I felt it. The air shifted. Someone was breathing behind me. The breathing behind me was the most horrifying sound I had ever heard. It wasn't normal breathing. It was ragged, uneven, like something was struggling to exist in that space. The air turned ice cold, and my skin prickled. I wanted to run. I wanted to turn around and face it. But deep down, I knew. If I moved too fast, if I showed fear, it would get worse. I swallowed hard and closed my eyes for a second, took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. My heart thundered inside my chest, but I made my legs move, slowly, without rushing. I walked out of the stockroom without looking back, but I knew it was following me. With every step, I could feel it moving too. The store felt different. The aisle seemed narrower. The ceiling felt lower. The digital clock behind the counter blinked. 3:15 a.m. The same time everything always happened. I leaned against the counter, staring at the security cameras. The screens glitched, static flickering between frames. But in the back of the store, I saw it. Him. But now, I was there too. The camera showed two of me. The real me stood behind the counter, watching in horror. But the other me, the thing that wasn't supposed to be there, stood in the back aisle, motionless, staring directly into the camera. And then it smiled. The same smile as a customer. The same smile that had been left on the glass door that night. The phone rang. I jumped so hard that my body nearly gave out. The store's landline was ringing. My hand hovered over it, hesitating. But I already knew. I knew who was on the other end. I picked up the phone. For a few seconds, there was only silence. Then a voice. "See you tomorrow." The line went dead. The clock flickered. 3:16 a.m. The door chime rang. By itself. My shift was over. But this was just beginning. But at the same time, something inside me screamed not to ignore it. Then I heard it. A soft thud from the back of the store. Something had fallen from one of the shelves. My heart hammered in my chest. I checked the time. 3:15 a.m. The exact time he always appeared. I took a deep breath and walked toward the sound. A bag of chips had fallen to the floor. I knelt to pick it up, and that's when I saw it. A note. A small, folded piece of paper tucked between the snack packages. It wasn't there before. My chest tightened as I reached for it. With shaking hands, I unfolded the paper. Two words were written in uneven handwriting, as if scribbled in a hurry. "Look up." My body locked up. I knew I didn't want to follow that instruction, but at the same time, I couldn't help it. My eyes slowly drifted upward, and what I saw above the shelves made all the air vanish from my lungs. The story was only beginning. First shift in the empty building, my first night as a security guard in that building seemed too quiet. The company was housed in a skyscraper in the city center, one of those modern places with mirrored glass and immaculate hallways. My job was simple. Monitor the cameras, patrol the empty floors, and make sure no one was where they shouldn't be. Easy. At least, that's what I thought. At the beginning of my shift, I noticed something strange. The surveillance system showed the building's floors clearly numbered, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 6. The 5th floor simply didn't exist on the cameras. I thought it was a system glitch, just some random technical failure. But when I went to check the elevator buttons, a chill ran down my spine. The number 5 wasn't there. There was no way to go to the 5th floor. My mind tried to rationalize. Maybe the floor was deactivated. Maybe it had simply been renamed. But if that were the case, why was it still on the evacuation map, hanging on the hallway wall? I ignored the uneasy feeling and continued my rounds. The hallways were empty. The lights flickered every now and then. The only sound was the echo of my own footsteps. It was a normal shift until something made me stop abruptly. The elevator doors opened by themselves. I stood frozen, watching as the doors slowly slid open, revealing an empty interior. No call had been registered on the security panel. No floor had been selected. But the strangest thing? Inside, at the back of the elevator, there were footprints. Wet footprints. As if someone had just stepped out. And for the first time that night, I felt that I wasn't alone in the building. I slowly backed away from the elevator, every muscle in my body tense. The building was empty. I was sure of it. But those wet footprints told a different story. Someone or something had just been there. I swallowed hard and rushed to the monitoring room. If there was someone inside the building, the security cameras would show me. I sat down, cracked my knuckles, and started scanning the floors. First the ground floor, then the second, the third, the fourth, all empty. When I reached the sixth, my hands started to sweat. The fifth floor wasn't supposed to exist. At least, not on the cameras. But something made my breath hitch. The fifth camera feed was active. The image was grainy, shaky, as if the system was damaged. But I could see the hallway. The lights flickered, revealing a row of old doors, different from any other floor in the building. It looked abandoned. And then I saw a man standing in the middle of the corridor. He didn't move. He just stood there, facing away from the camera. His clothes were old, a crumpled black suit and a dirty white shirt. His hair was short but unkempt, as if it hadn't been cut in a long time. My hands trembled as I tried to zoom in. The image glitched, but I saw a detail that made my stomach turn. He was barefoot, the footprints in the elevator. My heartbeat thundered in my chest. The man moved, but he didn't turn to the camera. Instead, he took one step to the side and disappeared. Vanished. He didn't enter any door. He didn't leave the frame. He simply ceased to exist. And that was when I noticed something even worse. The reflection on my monitor. Behind me, there was someone inside the security room. My body froze. My eyes remained locked on the screen, but in my peripheral vision, I could see something standing behind me. A dark figure. Still. Motionless. The security room was small. There was no way someone had entered without me noticing. Sweat dripped down my neck. The room was cold, but I felt a strange heat, like someone was too close. I didn't want to look, but I knew that if I didn't, it would stay there forever. My breathing shallowed. Slowly, carefully, I turned my head. The room was empty. My chair creaked as I shifted suddenly, my heart racing. I rubbed my face, trying to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But the monitor, the fifth floor camera, was still on. And now, the man was facing the camera. I stopped breathing. His eyes were empty voids, too deep to be real. His smile, small, unnatural. His skin was thin and wrinkled, like aged paper. He knew I was looking. The screen flickered, and when the image returned, he was gone. My phone rang. The sound echoed loudly in the silent room. My fingers trembled as I picked up the receiver. Silence. Then a voice. Low. Raspy. "You're on the wrong floor." The call cut off. The phone slipped from my hand. And when I looked back at the monitor, the fifth floor camera only showed the elevator doors open. Waiting. For who? I didn't want to find out. I shouldn't have left the security room. Something told me that staying there, surrounded by the cameras, would keep me safe. But after that call, after that voice, I knew that my choices no longer mattered. The elevator was waiting for me. The steel doors were open, as if they knew I was coming. The interior looked the same as always, but something was wrong. A strong smell of dampness and rusted iron filled my nose. I approached slowly, sweat dripping down my forehead. I knew I shouldn't step inside, but something was calling me in. The button panel was unchanged. There was no number 5. But as soon as I stepped inside the elevator, a shiver ran down my spine. The button appeared. There it was, the number 5, glowing, like it had been waiting for me. My hands trembled. I wanted to run. I wanted to leave that job and never come back. But my fingers were already moving. Before I could stop myself, I pressed the button. The doors slammed shut. The elevator began to descend, but instead of showing the floors counting down normally, the numbers glitched. 4 flickered, then 3, then 2. The number 5 never appeared. The elevator stopped. The silence was crushing. The doors slowly creaked open. I held my breath. What I saw was not a normal floor. And in that moment I knew I should have never stepped into that elevator. The elevator doors opened slowly, revealing a dark, suffocating corridor. The smell was unbearable. A mix of mold, dust, and something else. Something sweet and rotten at the same time. The air felt heavier there, as if the very space was wrong. My first instinct was to go back, press any button, and return to a place where the world still made sense. But the control panel was dead. No button responded. The elevator was not taking me back. My feet stepped onto the corridor floor without me realizing. The carpet felt rough and damp, as if it had never fully dried. Along the walls, old wooden doors lined up, irregularly, some crooked, others half open. The 5th floor existed, but it shouldn't. I swallowed hard and took a few steps forward. Something in that place felt like it was moving around me, as if the shadows stretched beyond what was possible. And then I heard it, a soft scratching sound from the farthest door in the corridor. My muscles locked. The sound repeated. Someone or something was inside. Holding my breath, I took another step. I approached carefully, trying to listen better. The scratching stopped. But before I could react, something happened. The door opened on its own, revealing a dark room. And in the center of it, something was waiting for me. Something that knew I would come. Something that wanted me to enter. My body screamed for me not to go in. Every fiber of my being told me it was a trap, that any step forward would take me to something I would never escape. But my feet moved on their own. The room was large, larger than it should have been. The walls were covered with faded, stained wallpaper. In the center was an old wooden table, and on it, a single object, an old black rotary phone, its line loose on the floor. It didn't make sense. I approached, feeling the colder air inside. The silence was absolute, as if the space were separated from the rest of the world. And then the phone rang. The sound cut through the silence like a sharp blade. My heart raced. Ring, ring, ring. My hand trembled as I picked up the receiver. For a moment, the line was silent. Then a breath. Low, slow, and then a voice. "You took too long to arrive." My stomach turned. I swallowed hard, trying to say something, but my throat was dry. "Don't look back." The phone hung up. The silence returned. I felt it. The presence. Behind me. Without turning around, I knew. I was no longer alone in that room. My breath caught in my chest. The silence inside the room was oppressive, dense, as if it sucked away all the sound around. I didn't want to turn around. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to obey the voice on the phone. But something inside me knew that if I didn't look, I would never leave. My gaze drifted around the room until I saw something in the corner of my eye. A dirty window, covered in dust, faintly reflecting the inside of the room. And that's when I saw it. There was something behind me, a tall, thin silhouette, standing just a few centimeters away. Its body was long and distorted, as if its bones were misplaced beneath its skin. The neck was too long, the head tilted to the side, as if it were studying me. And the eyes were the worst, black, deep, and reflecting a glow that shouldn't exist there. I was shaking, but when I blinked, the silhouette was closer. Its head was almost touching my shoulder now. My throat dried. I couldn't move. And then its mouth began to open, slowly, creaking, as if it were splitting in half. Something moved inside it, and in the final second before I passed out, I heard it. A hoarse, distorted voice. "Now you belong to this floor." After that, everything went black. I woke up on the cold floor, my head throbbing, and a metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. The air around me was dense, stifling, as if I were trapped in a small space. I slowly opened my eyes. It was dark, completely dark. There was no room anymore, no window, no phone. I was somewhere else. I groped around, trying to figure out where I was. The floor felt rough, like old concrete. The smell of dampness was strong, like I was in a basement. When I tried to stand, I hit my head on something. The ceiling was too low. My chest started to rise and fall quickly. My heart raced. I stretched my hand forward and touched a cold surface. It felt like metal. My fingers slid over the material, trying to find an exit. Then my lungs stopped. There were words scratched into the surface. I ran my fingers over the irregular marks, trying to decipher them in the dark. Panic hit me like a wave. The words were on the inside. "Help me. I'm not alone." And below those words, something new, something freshly scratched into the surface. Something that wasn't there before. "Now you're here too." The air grew heavy. A sound came from behind me. A breath. Slow. Deep. And then, something touched my shoulder. The cold touch on my shoulder made my body react before my mind. I pulled away quickly, hitting the metal walls around me. The space was too tight, too small. The breathing behind me continued. Low, slow, and it wasn't mine. I couldn't see anything. My hand slid along the metal, searching for something, anything, to get me out of there. Then I felt it. The floor tilted, slowly, as if it was forcing me to move. The darkness seemed to push me forward, guiding me into an even narrower space. A tunnel. I crawled through it, my heart racing. The air was heavy, hot, and smelled of wet dirt and rust. Behind me, something moved, crawling. The sound was low, but constant. The thing was coming. My breathing became irregular. I crawled faster, feeling the dampness of the tunnel cling to my skin. The space was tight, and I felt the weight of the walls around me more and more. Then, I saw a faint light ahead, a near non-existent glow, but real. I pushed myself with all my strength to reach it, but as I was about to leave, something grabbed my ankle and pulled hard. I wasn't alone in that tunnel. The force pulling my ankle was incredible. My body was dragged backward, my nails scraping against the dirt and metal as I tried to hold on. But there was nothing to hold on to. The thing in the tunnel pulled me with a silent determination. No growls, no words, just that cold, slow breath. My foot was pulled deeper into the darkness. I kicked with everything I had. My heel hit something hard, but fragile at the same time. I heard a crack, and the pressure on my ankle disappeared. I didn't wait. I pushed myself forward, crawling like an animal, ignoring the pain in my hands and knees. The tunnel seemed to close behind me, the darkness tightening, trying to swallow me. But then, I reached the light. I threw myself out of the tunnel, crashing to the cold floor. The air around me felt different. The smell of dust and mold was gone. I opened my eyes and realized where I was. The building lobby. Everything was normal. The clock on the wall showed the solitary shift in the subway. Working as a subway operator never bothered me. I liked the routine, the repetitive trips, the feeling of control inside the cabin. But I was always told that the last train was different. Nobody likes the last train. The platforms become empty. The tunnel seemed darker. The sound of the car echoes like a scream in the void. But that night, something was wrong before the trip even started. I had already checked the list. No passengers were supposed to be on the last train. But when I looked at the monitors, I saw someone sitting in the middle car. A single person. The silhouette was motionless, head down, as if asleep. Protocol dictated that I should check before departing. So, I left the cabin and walked to the car. The train was completely silent. No motor sounds, no tunnel noise. The door slid open slowly. The seat where the person had been sitting was empty. But the strange thing wasn't that. The strange thing was the seat itself. It was still warm, as if someone had just been sitting there seconds ago. My eyes lingered on that empty seat for too long. The warmth was still there, as if someone had just gotten up and left without me seeing. But that was impossible. The car was completely empty, or at least it should have been. I swallowed hard and took a step back, feeling a shiver run up my spine. I looked around. Nothing. No movement. No sound except for the faint hum of the stopped train. That's when I looked at the window glass. And I saw it. The reflection wasn't right. My own image was there. But I wasn't alone. Behind me, a tall, dark figure loomed in the back of the car. My heart raced. I turned immediately, expecting to see something there. But there was nothing. I looked back at the window. The reflection was still there. The figure was closer now. And before I could react, the train started moving. On its own. Without me having pressed anything. The train shouldn't be moving. My hands trembled as I held onto the metal bar, trying to understand what was happening. I hadn't activated the controls, but somehow we were moving. The subway tunnel passed like a dark blur outside the windows, lit only by the dim, flickering lights along the tracks. I tried to use the radio on my waist. Only static. I was completely alone. Or at least, that's what I wanted to believe. Then the sound came. Soft, distant, footsteps. They echoed through the car, as if someone was walking slowly between the seats. My breath caught. The footsteps were getting closer. But when I looked, there was no one there. The sound continued, closer and closer, each step firm on the metal floor. The temperature inside the car plummeted. The window glass beside me fogged up. And then, words appeared on the cold surface, written slowly, as if an invisible hand was tracing each letter. Do you see me? My throat dried. I blinked, and the words changed. Now they read, "But I see you." I stepped away from the window, my whole body shaking. Those words shouldn't be there. They had been written from the inside. But I was alone. Or at least, I should have been. The train kept moving, but now the tunnel seemed endless. No stations appeared. No lights indicated a stop. It was as if I were trapped in a place that didn't exist. Then, the radio crackled. The sound made me jump. A voice whispered on the other end. Low. Distant. He never left. My hand tightened on the radio. Who is this? My voice came out shaky. He never left the train. The radio turned off on its own. My chest rose and fell too fast. I turned slowly, looking at the empty seats. And that's when I saw it. A figure was sitting at the far end of the car. It didn't move. It didn't blink. But I knew it was watching me. The light flickered. And when it came back on, the figure was closer. My chest burned. Every muscle in my body screamed for me to run, but I couldn't move. The man at the end of the car remained still. No expression, no blinking. But every time the lights flickered, he was closer. Now! He was only a few seats away. My mouth went dry, my breathing shallow. I tried to speak, to ask who he was, but nothing came out. And then I noticed he had no face. Where his eyes, nose, and mouth should have been, there was only pale, smooth skin, like a wax mask. My stomach turned, and then he moved, slowly, without making a single sound. His head tilted slightly, as if he were studying me. A shudder ran down my spine. My feet finally reacted. I ran. I rushed past the seats. ignoring the distorted reflections in the windows. I tried to open the door to the next car, but it wouldn't budge. It was locked. Behind me, I heard a sound, something between a sigh and a dry creak. I turned for just a second. The faceless man was standing just a few steps from me, and for the first time, he made a sound, a weak laugh, low, cold, lifeless. My entire body trembled. The soft laugh from the faceless man seemed to echo through the entire car. My hands still yanked at the door, desperate, but it wouldn't budge. I had nowhere to go. Behind me, the footsteps started. Slow, deliberate. Each one made the metal floor vibrate. I turned around, my heart pounding in my throat. The faceless man was closer, his head tilted, his motionless body standing too still, as if waiting. Then he took a step forward, and another. He was coming. The only thing separating me from him was a few meters and the seconds I had left before he reached me. I twisted the door handle violently. It was still locked. My only option was to run in the other direction. So I did. I sprinted down the aisle, weaving between the seats, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But the car didn't end. I should have already reached the other end. But there was no end. Only more seats. More windows, more nothingness. Then I heard it, a second laugh, this time from in front of me. The blood drained from my face. I wasn't running away from the faceless man. I was running straight toward another one. My feet froze in place. The second laugh came from the front of the car, low and distorted. I couldn't keep running. No matter which direction I went, something was waiting for me. The car made no sense anymore. I could see the lights flickering above and the warped reflections in the windows. But there was no exit. It was as if I were inside a space folded in on itself. Then, the train began to slow down. The movement made my stomach churn. Outside the windows, the tunnel was different. The walls were covered in something dark, something that pulsed like a living organism. The red emergency lights inside the car flickered, and for a second I saw them, faces, trapped in the darkness of the tunnel. Eyes missing, mouths open as if screaming, but no sound came out. I staggered back from the window, my mind rejecting what I was seeing. Then a voice came, loud, clear. "You shouldn't be here." My skin went cold. I knew that voice. It was my own. The train came to a stop, but I knew I wasn't at any real station. The sign above the door flickered, displaying a name I had never seen before. Station 00. The air felt thicker. A deep, overwhelming sense of wrongness wrapped around me, warning me not to step out. But the doors opened on their own. Slowly, the faceless man still stood behind me, but I could feel that he wanted me to leave. Outside, the platform was dark. The air smelled strange, like iron. I didn't want to go out, but then the train behind me began to darken, like it was being swallowed by the same void that covered the tunnel. My body moved before my mind. I ran onto the platform. The door slammed shut behind me. The train sped away, vanishing into the tunnel of faces. And then I realized something. I wasn't alone on that platform. There were others, or at least something that looked like people, and they were all staring at me. They didn't move. The figures on the platform were motionless, their featureless faces fixed on me. The air felt suffocating, thick like a heavy fog pressing into my lungs. Then, one of them took a step forward, a tiny step, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to make every cell in my body freeze. Their skin looked wrong, too pale, too smooth. Then another one moved, then another, and another, each one slowly advancing toward me. Panic took over. My body reacted before my brain. I ran. I weaved between the figures, dodging their motionless stares as I tried to find a way out. But the station walls were too high, too dark, There was no way out. The only thing visible was a tunnel at the far end of the platform. Pitch black, endless, and from inside it, I heard something. A dragging sound. Something massive. Something not human. Then, the voice returned. Low. Cold. The train was never supposed to stop for you. I couldn't stay there. The figures kept advancing, their silent steps echoing on the concrete floor. The sound in the tunnel grew louder. Something huge was coming. I was out of options. Then, I saw it. A light blinking in the distance. The train was coming back. The figures froze. Their bodies stiffened, as if they had been waiting for this moment. The tunnel shook. A hot wind blew as the tracks vibrated. The train was moving too fast. I stepped back, my heart racing. The doors opened before it even stopped, and I ran. I jumped inside at the last possible second. The door slammed shut behind me. The subway shot forward into the tunnel. I collapsed onto the seats, gasping for air. I was back. The sign flickered. Now! It showed a familiar destination. Next stop, Central Station. Reality seemed to return, or at least, I thought it did, until I looked at the window reflection and saw the faceless man sitting next to me.